Hello, everyone. So it's been a remarkable 24 hours. Last night, unless you've been living under a rock, you'll know that Israel was hit by a barrage of missiles and drones from Iran in an unprecedented direct attack from Iran. And we saw Israel, along with its allies, America, Britain, and with the help of even countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, help to intercept 99% of the missiles. And it was just a remarkable moment. And it feels like a bit of a turning point. And I have a bunch of questions, and I know you have a bunch of questions, particularly about what happens next. And so, who better to help us understand what's going on than geopolitical expert Dr. Alan Mendoza, who is the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, which is a global foreign policy think tank based in London, which tries to advance Western interests. Alan, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. Let's just jump right in. Before we talk about what you assess happens next and what Israel does next, let's just talk about what just happened, because we've got to just take it in for a second. For you, what are some of the big takeaways from what we saw happening last night?
Well, I think the key takeaway is that for the first time, this proxy war between Israel and Iran, a war that's been fought in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, all these things, has finally taken a direct approach because, of course, the Iranians, for the first time, have attacked Israel directly. So I think that's hugely significant. The attack itself was, of course, heavily telegraphed. Around 300 missiles and drones were fired at Israel. Almost all of them were intercepted, because it was a telegraphed attack. Basically, there was enough time to get everyone in place to deflect it. And frankly, it's been an extraordinary moment, to see Iran engaging in this aggressive and open way. B, of course, the Israelis showcasing their missile defense technology, and C, as you've alluded to, this idea of an international coalition assisting in repelling what Iran was trying to do. And all those three things, I think, are quite significant.
Some people have been saying this was just posturing by Iran. There was a bit of advance notice, whether it was intentionally given or not, but it allowed for preparation for Israel to intercept. What do you think about that suggestion?
Well, it was certainly telegraphed to the point that, of course, all that could happen. And I think it's fair to say that the Iranians did not launch a surprise attack here. The Americans knew about it, the Israelis knew about it, Tehran apparently even informed neighboring countries it was happening all this time. So the actual attack itself was known about. I think, though, what takes it beyond the realm of mere posturing is the fact that 300 missiles and drones were fired. This was not 5 missiles or drones. This wasn't 10. It was 300. 300 is a significant number. And had any of those gotten through in a major way, they would have caused serious damage. We know a young girl has, of course, been critically injured. But even beyond that, there have been a lot more casualties potentially had that happened. So we're in a situation here where Iran was, intending to launch a very large-scale attack. It could have had very large-scale consequences. And as a result, this can't be put into the category of just another Iranian, kind of postulation. This is a see you and raise you, if you like, in card game terms. And the question, therefore, is what does Israel do in return to this raise, where Iran's crossed the red line of attacking Israeli territory for the first time directly?
And was the level of interception that was achieved by Israel and its coalition of partners pretty unprecedented in terms of its level of pretty miraculous success?
Yes, I mean, I think again, first let's start with the obvious. This is the most successful missile defense operation the world has ever seen. It's extraordinary that almost none of these things got through. And look, in part that's because the attack was known about. In part it was because different countries worked in concert to take on different parts of the attack. So I think the fact that, the RAF participated, the US Air Force participated, the French Air Force participated, we had the Jordanians, Saudis all doing their bit as well, tells you that this was a very uniquely successful operation simply because of time and allied effort to stop it. So it was an amazing repulsion of the attack. But let's not forget that this has cost Israel a heck of a lot of money. It's estimated, I think I saw several estimates of over $1 billion in order to repel this. The economy was brought to a close briefly. Airspace was shut down across the Middle East, not simply Israel. The disruption was huge. So although we can rightly celebrate the successful defense against this attack, the attack has still had costs.
Right. And what is the significance of Jordan and Saudi Arabia being involved in this interception operation? That also feels like pretty significant milestone if you know the history of Israel in the Middle East.
Yes, I mean, I think it says that actually, and to all those watching, it should send a powerful message. It says that Iran is viewed as the malefactor in the region, not Israel. The very fact that Arab states, some who have engaged in a pretty, not the exact, the warmest peace. Jordan is friendly, but also at arm's length. And the Saudis, of course, don't have a peace treaty with Israel and don't officially recognise it. The fact that they both decided they were coming in here tells you about the fears that Arab countries have about what Iran is really up to. And as far as they're concerned, any Iranian incursion against Israel is a threat to themselves because it could easily be them next. And so I think a lot of what you've seen on the Arab world reflects a fear of what Iran intends to do with the Arab world as much as what Iran intends to do with Israel.
And just explain that out for us, for those who don't understand. You say that Iran, they fear they could be next. What is Iran's game plan? Do they want to take over the whole of the Middle East?
Well, yes, Iran seeks primacy in the Middle East. Its aim is to be the regional hegemon, essentially the power that determines what happens in the Middle East. And as a result, Iran has built up what is called the Shia axis of resistance. Now, we're talking obviously about theological differences in Islam. Iran is a major Shia power, Saudi is the major Sunni power. Much of the rest of the Middle East is Sunni, but there are Shia adherents as well. And Iran has tried its best to cobble together a coalition, which includes obviously Syria, it includes Lebanon, or parts of Lebanon through Hezbollah, it includes Iraqi militias that are loyal to Iran, it includes the Houthis in Yemen. And these essentially are the Iranian coalition partners in their bid for primacy. And what Iran has been engaged in the last 45 years has not simply been hostility and attacks to Israel, but also hostility and attacks towards its Sunni Arab neighbours in a bid to become the top dog in the region. And that is why you've got countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and many others who fear Iran much more than they have any problem with Israel.
Right. And what do you think Israel does next? I mean, it's one question of what should they do next, and what do you think they will do next?
Well, it's a complicated situation. What we've been hearing today already is that the War Cabinet has met and has agreed that action must be taken. This cannot be allowed to just stand. But we're hearing that it might be action at the appropriate time, as opposed to necessarily action in the next couple of days. I think what the Israelis are doing here is obviously trying to preserve their freedom of maneuver and trying to work out what a suitable response will be. Part of that will, of course, be how do you square your international coalition of support that you've just seen last night? How do you square that with any potential reprisal action that you want to take? And clearly, the international community is trying its best now to dampen down tensions. It would quite like this to go away now and for there to be some kind of way that Iran and Israel can de-escalate. That may not, though, be possible for Israel on the basis that there's been a territorial attack state on state by another country. And, I think we will have to ask ourselves, if that was happening in the UK or the US or whichever country we were coming to, I can't imagine for a moment that the government would sit back and go, yeah, sure, we'll take that, it's fine, there was no damages. The fact you fired 300, we'll forget about it, it's not important. I suspect that Israel will have to, in order to retain its own deterrence capability, will have to strike back in some way. Now, whether that is a direct attack in the same approach, it might be a attack that's merely designed to warn Iran as opposed to actually causing serious damage. So you may see attacks on parts of Iran that do not really have much much danger of casualties in that sort of way, or particular targets that are not seen to be the most high profile. It might be a cyber attack, it might be something else. I think we can take it as given, though, that Israel will not sit back. That appears to, by the way, be the view across the board in Israel, whether you're left or right, that this has been an assault on the territorial integrity of the state, and it obviously needs some kind of response. But the real question is whether that happens now, whether that happens in a week's time, whether that happens in 3 months' time. And I think what Israel is doing in that way is creating a bit of ambiguity about what its intentions are, because it might wish to strike Iran at a time when Iran is not at fever pitch, if you like, and at a time when Iran is not expecting it.
Mm. And do you think this coalition would secretly, while they want de-escalation, would secretly want Israel to actually, let's say, cripple Iran in some way militarily? Would that, surely that would also be in their interest as well?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. It should be in their interest. It should be in Western countries' strategic interests to remove the great troublemaker in the region and stop it from being able to disrupt the region. And in certain ways, they should be, of course, cheering on the Israelis to do that. But, of course, it's complicated. You've got all sorts of domestic politics intervene. The US has an election this year. The last thing that it wants is a hot war necessarily between Israel and Iran that might drag the US into it. Equally, the UK has an election coming up again. That's not a great place for any country to be watching a war unfold in a very kind of controversial area where you face the electorate's views very shortly. And then you've got other considerations as well. The Arab states would definitely like to see Iran put back in its box, but they're wary of obviously being too open about it in case they become the next targets of Iran. And the questions really are, what would that even look like? What would an Israeli attack look like that would achieve that? Can the Israelis achieve it? How long does such a war take or conflict take? There are a lot of moving parts. And I think for that reason, because it's such a complicated process, people are taking a step back and going, no, in an ideal world, would like to be rid of this theological regime. But we've also got to think about the practicalities of how it happens and, what's the next steps as well. That doesn't, of course, mean that Israel's going to not do it, not going to try and do it. If Israel feels it has an opportunity, then it will do it. Because the one thing, Ollie, that last night showed us was that Israel has been absolutely correct to suggest that it faces an existential threat from an Iranian nuclear weapon. That much is quite evident. Now that Iran has attacked Israel directly, it is clear that it possesses the intent, at the very least, to do damage to Israel. And that intent to do damage will be magnified many times with a nuclear weapon, which is why, of course, Israel has been quite right to be at the center point of the coalition against Iran getting that nuclear weapon, because it knows full well it will be first in the firing line. And I think that issue of the nuclear program is going to come back up now because of what we saw last night.
And where are they with regard to their nuclear program at the moment? What's the current state of play?
Well, it's a very complicated one because we've got the joint comprehensive plan of action limping along, without America in it, of course, with the Europeans and others still clinging on to it, despite the fact that Iran has been openly breaking the terms of it since 2018. So what that means is that for the last 6 years, Iran has basically been enriching uranium to a high level. It's been doing all it can to get to that nuclear sort of staging post where it can decide whether to break out. And the reality is we have to assume that by now Iran has got the capability to develop the nuclear knowledge that's required for a nuclear bomb. That doesn't mean they're necessarily going to do it, and it doesn't mean they can deploy it, because there's a whole set of other things that need to go into place in order to deploy a nuclear weapon. But they certainly have that knowledge by now, and that is in itself a problematic point of view. And so the question therefore is, what is the European response to what happened last night in terms of the nuclear program? Isn't it time that Europeans came out of this failed treaty, which Iran's been breaking? Isn't it time they snapped back sanctions on Iran as a punishment in terms of what it's been doing? And isn't it time for the world to once again stop considering that this is some kind of moderate regime where you can somehow talk your way around and they're going to abandon their nuclear ambitions, and to think of it as what it is? A dangerous theocratic regime that's going to continue pursuing its aims no matter what it tells the rest of the world.
Right. But what you might get is some people saying, okay, I'm not going to say it's moderate, but they don't really want all-out war. They know that could destroy them. So they're just, all this is just posturing, and it's just tit for tat, and they know that Israel's going to intercept and all that. And so they don't actually think that they are really prepared to go all the way in terms of wanting to, God forbid, do something really destructive and disastrous. What do you say to people that think that?
Well, we've been hearing that there's a version of this regime we can work with for the last 45 years. It's been a common point to say, oh, look, this moderate, that reformer, this, the other.
They say the extremists don't really mean that they don't really mean what they say, because they don't want to destroy their own state in the process of all that.
So I was about to come to that and say, actually, what's interesting is you've got the first argument about moderates and reformers, which don't exist in any meaningful way. What you've then got is the second argument on top of that, which says they're rational people, they're logical people, they understand these terms. And actually, there is some truth to that. The idea that the Iranians are going to run headlong into some kind of war that they will end up with their departure has been shown to be something they don't do in the past. And we've seen many times the regime has blinked at the moment of fear. For example, when Khamenei ended the Iran-Iraq war, it's something he said he'd rather take poison than do. He did it because he felt the regime was being compromised by the constant battle. He felt it was going to collapse if it continued. So he chose survival over this war. In 2003, when the Americans invaded Iraq, the Iranians were terrified they'd be next because of their real nuclear program as opposed to the one that didn't really exist in Iraq. And so what did? They came forward voluntarily and said, hey, we've got a nuclear program. Let's talk about it rather than you invade. They showed fear. They showed that they would rather negotiate with the Americans and try to, kind of avoid an attack that would end the regime. When Qasem Soleimani was killed in January 2020, the terrorist-in-chief, by Trump, the initial Iranian reaction was, we're going to punish you severely, we're going to rain hell upon you. Until they were told by the Trump administration, if one American gets hurt in this way, we have 100 targets we're going to bomb in Iran. And if you come back at us after that, there'll be 100 more. And this ends only one way. It ends with you being carried out of Tehran in body bags. So what do you say, Iran? Iran chose at that moment in time to once again pull back. So the reality is there is some rationality there, and there is a sense that if the regime is in peril, they will pull back from it. But all that changes, Ollie, if they get a nuclear weapon. Then the balance of power changes. The regime is much more secure because who's going to attack a nuclear-armed state? That's not going to happen because if you do that, you're the irrational one. And so the calculation has always been we need the nuclear weapon in order to protect ourselves, but not simply protect ourselves, to provide the cover for us to be aggressive overseas. It doesn't mean they might necessarily use a nuclear weapon, but imagine last night times 5 or times 10 if they had the nuclear weapon, safe in the knowledge that if Israel reacts, they could go nuclear in that sort of way. That changes the equation fundamentally. It's a dangerous power gambit that Iran is playing, and we cannot, for that matter, allow them to get access to a nuclear weapon because it's not that they might use it, but they might use the cover of it to do even worse things than they're doing now.
Yeah. And 2 final questions. First of all, how do you think things look depending on whether you have a Biden or a Trump president moving forward?
Well, I think, Joe Biden, to be fair to his presidency, has been very good at helping Israel's defense in the sense of, when Israel needs defensive capabilities, when it was attacked on October the 7th, when it was attacked last night, the Americans were perfectly happy to step in quite a stunning way in order to assist the country. Where, however, the Biden administration has been negligent, of course, is in finishing the job. And we've seen, of course, that it has given very mixed messages over the destruction of the terrorist group Hamas. It is trying to rein back Israel from dealing with some of the other threats that it faces, whether it's Hezbollah or other matters. And it seems to be adopting a very defensive strategy all round. Now, defensive strategies are fine for a time, but the problem with defensive strategies is that you're always on the back foot, you are always reacting. And it encourages aggressors to keep having a go at you until some point that they find the weak spot, the weak link in your armor, and can press on it and through that. What you'll probably get with the Trump administration is something different. Now, no one knows which version of Trump gets up every given morning. It's a different version of Trump every day. But that is, in a sense, a calculated part of what Trump did in his first term and what he would no doubt do in his second term. It's because of his unpredictability that you don't want to particularly take him on. And you don't know if, kind of tweaking his tail means he'll do nothing or he will himself launch a nuclear strike against you. And so that sort of, the so-called madman theory, which Richard Nixon originally introduced in Vietnam in the early 1970s, what's he going to do? It's too dangerous to kind of go against him. Let's kind of come to terms rather than test him, is what Trump would no doubt look to bring again to the scene. And that would again probably deter the Iranians. Again, let's not forget, nobody thought Trump would kill Qasem Soleimani in January of 2020. The options were presented to Trump, and from what I understand, the situation was absolutely stunned and shocked when he chose the most extreme option. Because that option had been on the table many times before to previous presidents. They'd all said, no, we won't do that. And Trump went there. So that shows you his unpredictability, essentially. That unpredictability can help in actually keeping international peace because you don't want to cross such a person. So I suspect that, the Biden administration will keep its defensive posture, but Trump would take a more aggressive stance, and that might in itself be a much more sensible place for the West and Israel to be at, given the problems that we're seeing mounting on the international stage right now.
Yeah, the peace through strength principle. Lastly, how does this affect what's happened in Gaza with the war against Hamas? Do you think global sympathies, which were moving away from Israel, are going to move back in Israel's favour? What does Israel do in the final stages of that war?
Well, I think the two issues have to be handled discreetly. I think what happened last night was an attempt, if you like, by the rest of the world to show that they haven't abandoned Israel, they haven't gone, we're all against you. But that's not going to change the view that is increasingly being propagated, and it's a wrongful view, in my opinion, that Israel needs to declare a unilateral ceasefire right now and end the point. The one thing I'll say is that Israel has somewhat played into the hands of the ceasefire lobby by seemingly not finishing the job it set out to do. And if you think about the following, Israel reached the outskirts of Rafah at the last redoubt of Hamas in mid-February. There was then a pause as they said, we will wait until the 10th of March for you to release the hostages and then we'll go in and sort this out. Well, it's now the 14th of April and nothing has happened. In fact, the only thing we've seen is that no hostages have been released, but Israel has now withdrawn its forces. Well, if Israel has withdrawn its forces, what is its plan now for Gaza and for the end of this conflict? Is it simply going to play a very long game of whack-a-mole, essentially, and every time Hamas appears, it's going to try and come in? If it does that, how does that work on a humanitarian level with the many refugees within Gaza now who've had to move around the country? There's going to have to be a way of dealing with them, as has started to happen with the opening of the crossings. And I think the clarion calls for you don't seem to know what you're doing and you've got to end this are getting stronger. So I think Israel needs to come up with a plan and quickly as to how it proposes to end this conflict militarily and then move on to the next stage, which is life without Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Because right now, Rafah remains a Hamas-controlled area. And you can't credibly say you have destroyed Hamas until you have gone into Rafah and cleared out the last Hamas battalions. It doesn't mean Hamas has disappeared completely. We know that. We know there'll still be vestiges here and there. But you can't allow them a base within which they can operate. And Israel needs to answer those questions as much as everyone else does about where we go next in this conflict.
Brilliant. Alan, thank you so much for helping us understand a very complex and messy and difficult situation. And we can only hope for peace and security for all those who love freedom and peace and prosperity for all. Really appreciate your time, as always. Thank you so much for enlightening us.
Ollie.
Hi everybody, thanks for watching. If you want to watch another one, click here. If you want to subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest JTV content, click here. And if you're feeling really keen, you can click the join button down below underneath this video, where you can get perks including early access to new videos and private live discussions with me, where we can talk about JTV content and strategy moving forward, and I'll get to hear from you. Thanks again for watching.